was in a lot of contact, firefights, and lost soldiers, both dead and wounded.
So there's a lack of acknowledgement of the relationship that was there.
That's why I use the word ambiguous loss. I feel connected to them. I feel like I lost something. There's definitely a lack of closure.
Trauma needs unpacking. It needs to be named, it needs to be acknowledged, it needs to be worked through, but we've got to break through the silence, and that feels good, and that's healing. We've got to acknowledge the impact. We've got to work through the trauma together, not in silence, not in disconnection, not in isolation of one another.
Danger X.
Okay, today we're going to talk about lack of healing, insufficient acknowledgement, insufficient communication, ultimately insufficient healing in a veteran and also with the spouse and with the family. And kind of a closely tied term, or term we can tie to this is like this ambiguous loss. If I can give a couple examples, I was in a lot of contact, firefights, and lost soldiers, both dead and wounded. Now, with the deceased soldiers, there was an effort made to have what we called hero flights. So what that would be, the body would be taken back. In this case, it was FOB Warhorse. I was deployed out in the city or in the areas around the city, palm groves, sand areas. But there'd be an effort to kind of pull people together on base and fly the body out and have a moment of silence and have a little service.
Representing that acknowledgement.
Yeah, so that's kind of that acknowledgement that you lost somebody. I didn't see all of those. I mean, so I was outside the base, and in some cases I wouldn't come back I'd lose somebody and I wouldn't be back on base for another week. And I'd be fighting and have other missions and things like that. And so I'd miss that acknowledgement.
Yeah. Another
place where I'd miss having a little bit of closure is there were a lot of units being mixed matched around. So we were unprepared. I say we as a larger army were unprepared for this battle, and we're trying to piecemeal making things happen. So one example is I had some mortar teams that were assigned to me, and we lost, I think it was two of them. But officially, those guys were part of headquarters company. So there was no institutional thought to make sure that my platoon who had been out there fighting with them would be back on base for this hero flight to also mourn that we just lost them. Because that was a different unit. So this other unit was on base. They had the hero flight, and that's all great.
Yeah.
But I was
you
with
were there.
them.
Yeah. So there's a lack of acknowledgement of the relationship that was there. That
Right.
that happened.
I mean, in
that's
a way,
big deal.
that's why I use the word ambiguous loss, because it's kind of like, did you lose the guy? Well, he wasn't my guy, but yeah, I feel responsible for him and I feel connected to him. Yeah, I feel like I lost something. And there's never there's a missing sense of like, let's mourn them together or mourn them together.
Yeah.
And it's the same, I know we're going into so many things here, but there's a similar sense with the wounded. Specialist Lopez broke, my driver, I'm in the Bradley when it happens, massive IED, breaks, I don't know, 8 bones in his leg, and he goes back. I've never heard from him again. Never heard back. In some sense, there's some people who, just with Facebook these days, you have a small connection, or you talk to once, but there's definitely a lack of closure. I'd really like to connect with more people.
Yeah.
Hear from them, even if it's short. I know we're all busy.
Yeah. From like a psychological standpoint, right? Like trauma needs unpacking, right? It needs to be named, it needs to be acknowledged, it needs to be worked through. And there has to be pieces of information that we're willing to mine and collect. If you don't have access to that, that also kind of impedes the meaning making. Like, how do you make sense of what happened? So it sort of thwarts being able to process through. And it sounds like, there's a hint of structural things in place that not just questions that perhaps nobody can answer, but structurally in the military, the lack of or the insufficient passing down transparency of information, and that insufficient knowledge that gets passed down, or a deeper form of debriefing, right? That creates like this lack of closure, like for the service member. And it starts from kind of up there. I think like that helps trickle stuff down, because what then is something that family members get to know at some point. And whether or not there's like at each stepping point, there's a filtering more of information that happens. And that filtering of information could be because it's avoidance. It could be because structurally that procedure is not in place to do deeper debriefings, right? It could be anything else, like the psychological trauma impact that it has, that breaks down the communication, the honest communication. And in order for us to move through traumas, what we're doing right now, that's kind of a huge thing, but we've got to break through the silence, and we've got to, in order to break through this willingness to break through the silence, and when we're able and we're willing, like now, collecting information, which is what you've been doing to help make sense. And now we're piecing things together, and that feels good, and that's healing.
Let's get it out there. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we want to be doing here, to pass that on to other people so they can relate and so they can know, that this, it doesn't have to be this cryptic thing that you have to live with for the rest of your life. There are ways that you can fill in the blanks and make meaning.
There is one thing that I think would be very powerful. You've told me before that when you started to see some of the heavy fighting that I was involved with, it allowed you to give a little bit more a little bit more empathy, compassion when I would be having these really tough, depressed days. And so I'd kind of like to give a plug if there's anyone that's watching. It just hasn't been acknowledged, hasn't really been put out there. We lost an entire battalion. Just let that sink in for a minute. 800 dead and wounded Americans. That's not a popular story, but let's put it out there. So for the people who are still here, who are surviving, maybe suffering in silence, it did happen, man. It happened. We lost 800 dead and wounded. We lost an entire battalion. I'll butcher the exact numbers, but what? 30 tanks, 40 Bradley fighting vehicles in one battle? That's massive. That's like landing in Normandy kind of numbers.
And we have to name it.
We have to name it. It did exist. It happened. Let's talk about it together.
And the impacts that it has on the families. It happened. It happens. It's happening. And we've got to acknowledge the impact. And we got to try to work through it. We got to work through the trauma together, not in silence, not in disconnection, not in isolation of one another.